Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. This is the fifth session of the National Tutoring Campaign. My name is Amit Sheikh, and I will be assisting you with grade 10 mathematics. Our topic for today is statistics, and we are going to be focusing on the last part of it, which is the revision and consolidation of this section. What we have done thus far with regards to statistics is we've learned to collect, organize, and interpret univariate numerical data to determine measures of central tendency in grouped and ungrouped data, the estimated mean of group data, the model interval and the interval in which the median lies, the 5-number summary, box and whisker diagrams, measures of dispersion to include range, percentiles, quartiles, interquartile range, and semi-interquartile range, as well as to use the statistical summaries to interpret, analyze, and make meaningful comments on the context associated with the given data. Today's lesson objective is by the end of the lesson, learners will have revised the main concept covered in statistics. Okay, for this lesson, number one, we are going to answer the exercise from the previous lesson so that learners may do their corrections. Number two, we're going to revise and answer questions based on statistics. I've also put up the link for the worksheet that I'm going to be using during this lesson. Furthermore, I've also put up a few videos for you guys based on the subtopics in statistics, and there's 7 videos which you guys can watch and get a better understanding of this section. Okay, so let's put up last week's worksheet. Okay, so last week's exercise was number one, the following data is given. So we have 5, 6, 7, 10, 14, 20, 4, 0, 15, and 16. And that tells us we have 10 data values in this set here. Looking at it, let's look at the questions that were asked regarding this data set. So number one, determine the range of the data. If you recall, the first thing we need to do before working with any data set is put it in ascending order, meaning from the lowest data value to the highest data value. So I've done that already, and I've labeled my positions for each data value as well. Remember, this is very important in order for us to work out the measures of dispersion. So let's look at 1.1. It says to determine the range of the data. So we know the range is basically the highest value in the data set minus the lowest value in the data set. So my calculation is going to be 20 minus 0. And that gives me an answer of 20. So that tells me my range for this data set is equal to 20. Let's look at 1.2. 1.2 says to determine the upper quartile, quadrant, quartile 3 of the data set. Okay, so let's get to that. In order for us to work out the upper quartile, we need to establish which is the lower half of the data set and which is the upper half. And if we look at our data set, has 10 data values, and if you split that in half, you're left with 5 at the front and 5 in the back. So let's just highlight that so you can clearly see which is the upper half and which is the lower half. Okay, remember our median is going to lie at position 5 and position 6. So our median is going to be in between these two values, but for now we are calculating quadrant 3. So if you look at our data set, we've got 5 values above our upper half. So we need to put that into our formula first. And we have 5 values after our median, or in the upper half. So n is equal to 5. And if you have to calculate that, we've got 5, and 5 plus 1 over 2 is 3. So 5 plus 3, and that tells us that position 8 is our Q3. So let's highlight position 8. And we can see that position 8, Q3, is equal to 15. Okay, let's look at question 1.3. Question 1.3 says to determine the lower quartile of the data set. So if I'm looking at the lower half, that is basically my lower half. And we need to calculate the median of the lower half. So we've got 5 values, n is equal to 5. And 5 plus 1 over 2 is equal to 3. Let's highlight our Q1. And we can see position 3 is equal to 5. Okay, let's look at question 1.4. And 1.4 says to determine the interquartile range of the data. And in order for us to calculate the interquartile range, it is our Q3 value, which is 15. And we subtract our Q1 value, which is 5. And 15 minus 5 is 10. Therefore, our interquartile range for this set of data is equal to 10. And the last question in that exercise was 1.5, and it says to determine the 70th percentile of the data. So our formula is the percentile over 100 times the number of data values in our set. And we are asked to calculate the 70th percentile. And we have 10 data values in our set. So it would be 70 over 100 times 10. And that would give us an answer of 7. So that tells us that our 7th position is the 70th percentile. So that this means that 70% of the data items are less than or equal to 14. As we can see, 14 is position 7. Okay, and that is your answers to the exercise from the previous session. Okay, so we're going to look now at today's lesson, which is revision and consolidation of statistics. Okay, so I've also uploaded this worksheet for you guys so you can work with these questions after we are done. So if you're looking at 1.1, let's first read the question. It says the line graph below shows the test marks out of 10 obtained by grade 10 class. Okay, so we can see the line graph and we can see we have the y-axis labeled as the frequency and we have the x-axis labeled as the marks. So let's look at 1.1. It says complete the frequency column in the table provided in the answer book. And this basically was the table that was provided. with regards to that question. And all we have to do is we need to fill in our frequency for the data set given to us. So if you're looking at 0.0, we can see the frequency is 0. Therefore, our frequency column, we're going to enter 0. If we're looking at the next point, which is the next mark, which is 1, we can see we have a frequency of 3. Therefore, in our frequency column, we're going to enter 3. We're looking at our next mark, which is 2, that has a frequency of 4. And if we look at the next mark, which is, my apologies, 2 has a frequency of 4, and 3 has a frequency of 5. We look at the next mark, which is 4. It has a frequency of 3, and 5 has a frequency of 6. 6 has a frequency of 0. As we can see, it lies in line of 0. If you're looking at 7, it has a frequency of 7. And 8 has a frequency of 9. 9 has a frequency of 5. And 10 has a frequency of 0. Okay, and that is 1.1 complete. Let's look at the next question, which is 1.2. How many learners wrote the test? So in order for us to calculate that, we need to calculate the total of our frequency column. Let's get out our calculator and let's work that out. So we got 0 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 3 plus 6 plus 7 plus 9 plus 5. And that tells us that we have a total of 42. So 42 learners is our answer for that. For question 1.2. Let's look at question 1.3.1. And it says to calculate the range of the data. And in order for us to calculate the range, we need to look at the highest value in our data set and subtract the lowest value in our data set. So we can see the highest value that we have is 9, which is mark 9, and the lowest value is 1. So in order for us to calculate the range, it's going to be 9 minus 1, which is equal to 8. 1.3.2. Calculate the mean for the test. Okay, so remember the mean is the sum of the entire data set divided by the number of values in that data set. So we're looking at our first set of data values. We have mark 1, but we have 3 times 1. And if we're looking at our next value, or the next number in our data set, which is mark 2, and we have 4 of them. So in order for us to calculate this without drawing our midpoint in our frequency column, we can do it in one calculation. And what we're going to do is we're going to work out the sum in our mean formula. Okay, so our first set of values is going to be 1 It's going to be 1 times 3. And our second set of values is going to be 2. If you're looking at the second set, it's going to be 2. Times 4. And if you're looking at our third set of values, we've got 3 times 5. So plus 3 times 5. And if you look at our next set, we've got 4 times 3. And if we look at our next set, we've got 5 times 6. So that's 5 times 6. Our next set gives us, all right, we've got 0 frequency for 6, so we do not need to add this into our calculation. We're looking at our next mark, which is 7, and that set is 7 times 7. Our next value, we have next set, we have 8 times 9. And if we're looking at the next set, we have 9 times 5. And if you're looking at the next set, we've got 0 amount of mark 10, so we do not need to add that into our calculation. We already worked out how many learners are in this data set, or how many values we have in this data set, which was equal to 42. So let's calculate that. So we've got, all right, we've got our first bracket, 1 times 3, we've got 3. Our second bracket, we've got 2 times 4, which is 8. Our third bracket, we've got 3 times 5, which is equal to 15. Our fourth bracket, we have 4 times 3, which is 12. And our next bracket, we have 5 times 6, which is 30. And we have 7 times 7, which is 49. And we have 8 times 9, which is 72, and 9 times 5, which is 45. Remember, that's all going to be over 42. Let's calculate that. So we've got 3 plus 8 plus 15 plus 12 plus 30 plus 49 plus 72 plus 45. And that gives us a total of 234 divided by 42 learners, and that equals to 5,57. Remember, once again, you need to follow your instruction with regards to your test or examination, and it would state very clearly how many decimal places. The usual amount is 2 decimal places, so I'm going to round it off to 2 decimal places, and my answer was 5,57. Okay, let's look at the next question. So we're looking at 1.3 1.4, determine the median for the data set. So in order for us to calculate the median, remember, we have 42 values and is equal to 42. So that would be 43 divided by 2. And let's calculate that. That gives us the 21.5th position. Okay, and if we're looking at our 21.5th position, in order to establish that, we need to find position 21 and position 22. Remember, if it's 21.5, we need to add position 21 and 22 and divide it by 2 in order to establish our median. So if I'm looking for position 21, I've got 0 plus 3, which is 3, 3 plus 4, which is 7, 7 plus 5, which is 12, 12 plus 3 is 18, and 18 plus 6 18 plus 6, which would give me 24. Okay, so that let's calculate that one more time. 3 plus 4 is 7, 7 plus 5 is 12, 12 plus 3 is 15, and 15 plus 6 is 21. So that tells me that Mark 5 is the 21 position of my data set. So I'm going to enter 5 there. And 6 was not in our data set. It was never in the data set. The frequency is 0. So we're going to have to look at the next value. So our 22nd position would be Mark 7. Therefore, it's going to be 5 plus 7 divided by 2. And that equals to 6. So that tells me that the median of my data set, Q2, is equal to 6. 1.5, draw a box and whisker diagram for the data set. Okay, so we've already got our minimum. We know it's 1. Our maximum is 9. I've already drawn the box and whisker. Let's enter our minimum value first, which will be 1. Let's enter our maximum value, which will be 9. Okay, Q2, we said is 6. Our Q1, we calculated. Okay, we need to calculate our Q1 and we need to calculate our Q3. Okay, if we're looking at our data set, Q1 would be equal to Mark 3. Therefore, we're going to label Q1 with 3. And if you're looking at our data set again, and Q3 should equal to Mark 8. Therefore, I'm going to enter 8 in my box and whisker diagram for Q3. And that is question 1.5 complete. Okay, let's look at the next question. We have the data below shows the number of laptops sold by 15 sales agents during the last financial year. So we've got 15 values in our data set, and it shows the amount of laptops that they sold or that each agent sold. So remember, step 1, we need to rearrange our data set in ascending order before working out any of our calculations. And let's look at our data set. Our smallest value in our data set is 34. So I'm going to go and enter 34. If we're looking at the next value, it would be 37. And the next value would be 43. Our next value, which should be 46. Following that, we should be looking at 48. Remember, 48 is there twice. 48 and 48. The next lowest value is 52. Then we have 54. Our next lowest value, which will be 58. We then have 62, then 68, 73, but 78, 84, and the last value is 90. Okay. So I think we're ready for action. Let's look at question 1.1. Determine the median of the number of laptops sold. Remember, in order for us to calculate the median, it's going to be n plus 1 over 2. So let's do our calculation. We've already established we've got 15 data values. So it's going to be 15 plus 1 divided by 2. And that is 16 divided by 2, which tells us it's the 8th position. And if we go to the 8th position, we can see that it equals to 54. And that should be the median for our data set. Let's look at 1.2. 1.2 says to calculate the range of the data. Okay. And if we're looking at the highest value in our data set, it's 90. So that's going to be 90 minus the smallest value in our data set, which is 34. And 90, let's calculate them. 90 minus 34, and that equals to 56. So the range for question 1.2 is 56. 1.3, calculate the interquartile range. Remember, in order for us to calculate it, we need to work out the median of the lower half, and we need to work out the median of the upper half. So let's first calculate the median of the lower half. So that is our lower half. Let's highlight that. Okay, so we've got 7 values in our lower half. And let's input our values into our formula. So n is equal to 7 plus 1 over 2. And that's 8/2, which is equal to the fourth position. Okay, let's look at what our fourth position is. And we can see that our fourth position is equal to 46. Okay, let's work out our Q3 value. So we're looking at the upper half of our data set. And we can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 values here. So let's enter our values. Into our formula so that we can calculate our Q3. So remember, before we input our upper half, we need to add all the values that lie before our upper half, and we have 8 values there. And we have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 values in our upper half, plus 1/2, and 8 plus 8/2 is 4. And that tells me that equals to the 12th position. And let's look at what our 12th position is equal to. And we can see position 12 is equal to 73. So if I had to calculate my IQR or my interquartile range, it's going to be 73 minus 46. And let's calculate that. 73 minus 46. That equals to 27. Therefore, my interquartile range for this given data set is equal to 27. 1.4. It says to draw a box and whisker diagram of the above data. Okay, we have all the information that we require to sketch our box and whisker diagram. Okay, let's look at our minimum value. We have 34 and our maximum is 90. So I've got 34 and my maximum, which is 90. We've already worked out our Q1, Q2, and we've got our Q3. So we got 46, 54, and 73. 46, 54, and 73. And that should be a box and whisker diagram for question 1.4 based on the given data set. Okay, let's look at question 2 on the next question. We say, it says that a learner did a project on climate change. At 1400 hours each day, or at 2 o'clock each day, she recorded the temperature in degrees Celsius for a certain term. The information is given in the frequency table. Okay, so we've got a frequency table. We've got the temperature column, which is broken up into intervals for us already, as well as the frequency for each interval. Let's look at 2.1. 2.1 says, for how many days did the learner collect the data? In order for us to calculate this, all we need to do is calculate the total of our frequency column. Let's add that up. So we've got 2 plus 4 plus 9 plus 5 plus 7 plus 3, and that equals to 30. So that tells me that this data was done for 30 days. Okay, let's look at 2.2. 2.2 says to write down the model class for the data. And basically, we're going to look for the highest frequency with regards to the intervals. And we can see the greatest frequency is 9. And that given interval is 28 less than equal to t, which is less than 32. So it's 28 less than equal to t, which is less than 32. Okay, let's look at 2.3. Estimate the mean of the data. Now, again, we can avoid drawing our 2 extra columns. So we can find our midpoint and multiply it by our frequency and add each of those calculations together to work out the sum of our frequency times midpoint. Let's do that in one calculation. So if we have to work out our midpoint of 20 to 24, it's going to be, let's do that, 20 plus 24 divided by 2, and that gives us a midpoint of 22. And we can calculate this one time because we already know our frequency for that interval is 2. So it will be 22 times 2. And that equals to 44. If you're looking at our next midpoint, we have 24 plus 28 divided by 2. And we have a frequency of 4 for that interval. So we're gonna times our answer by 4, and that gives us a total of 104. Looking at our third interval, we have a midpoint of 28 plus 32 divided by 2, and we have a midpoint of 30. And we can see the frequency for that was 9. So we're going to multiply 30 by 9, and that gives us a total of 270. We're looking at our fourth interval. So we've got 32 plus 36 divided by 2, and that gives us 34, and we have a frequency of 5, so we say 34 times 5, and that gives us 170. We're looking at our fourth interval. We've got, our fourth interval, we've got 36 to 40, so let's calculate our midpoint. But 36 plus 40 divided by 2, our midpoint is 38, and we have a frequency of 7, so we're going to multiply 38 by 7, and that gives us a total of 266. Our last interval, our midpoint calculation is going to be 40 plus 44 divided by 2, and that gives us 42. We can see we have a frequency of 3, so we're going to say 42 multiplied by 3, and that gives us an answer of 126. We've already calculated how many values in our data set. It was 30 days, so let's calculate the sum divided by 30. So we've got 44 plus 104 plus 270 plus 170 plus 266 plus 126. And that gives me a total of 980 divided by 30 data values. So I've got 980 divided by 30, and my answer was 32.666 and so on. Remember, we said we're going to round up to 2 decimal places. So our answer would be 32.67. And that is our mean for this given data set. Okay, we're looking at 2.4. Estimate the mean, calculate the percentage of days on which the temperature was at least 28 degrees Celsius. So in order for us to calculate that, we first need to see how many days was at least 28 degrees Celsius. Remember, this is less than 28 and does not include 28. So we're looking at all the values from 28 to 32 going all the way down to the last interval. So our calculation is basically going to be 9 plus 5 plus 7 plus 3. And let's calculate that. 9 plus 5 plus 7 plus 3. And that tells us that we have 24 days which had a temperature of at least 28 degrees Celsius. Now, in order for us to calculate the percentage of the number of days, it's going to be the days that was at least 28 degrees Celsius over the total number of days, which will be 30, and we multiply that by 100. Let's calculate that. So we've got 24 divided by 30 times 100, and that tells us our answer is 80%. Okay, and that was the last question in question 2. Let's look at our next question. Okay, it says that the height of 20 children were measured in centimeters and the results were recorded. The data collected is given in the table below. So we've got 20 data values, and these are the heights of each of these children in centimeters. Okay, so our first step is to first rearrange that in ascending order. Let's look at our data set first, and we can see that it's already in ascending order for us. So we've got 20 columns. And 2 rows. Okay, so that's our position. And these would be our data values. Okay, let's enter the values. So we've got position 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Seventeen, 18, 19, and 20. Okay, perfect. Let's enter the data values that we have. We first have 127, then 128, 29, 130, 131, 133, 134, another 134, and 135, 136, okay, we've got 137, 138, 139, 140, 141, 142, 143. Sorry, we have two 142s. Then we have 143, 144, and the last one is 145. Okay, so let's split that up to make it a little bit easier to see. So we've got 10. So first 10 values. Those were our first 10 values. Our second 10 values. Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's look at the questions that are asked based on this data set. So we're looking at question 1.1. Write down the median height measured. Now, remember, in order for us to calculate the median height, we need to establish Q2. And we've already established how many values are in our data set. We have 20 data values. So N is 20 plus 1 over 2. And that's 21 over 2, which is equal to 10,5. And remember, if it's 10,5, it's going to be position 10, and it's going to be position 11. And if we look at position 10 and position 11, position 10 is 136, and position 11 is 137. So We have to calculate our median. We've got 136 plus 137 divided by 2. Remember, that's the 10.5 position. And we established it's 136 plus 137 divided by 2. Let's calculate that. 136 plus 137 divided by 2. And it tells us that we have a median of 136,5. Okay, so we're looking at question 1.2. It says to determine the mean height. In order for us to calculate the mean, it's the sum of the entire data set divided by the number of data values in our data set. Okay, let's calculate our sum of the data set. So first value is 127 plus 128 plus 129 plus 130 plus 131 plus 133 plus 134 plus 135 plus 136 plus 137 138 plus 139 plus 140 plus 141 142 plus 142 plus 143 plus 144 plus 145. Okay, let's just do that one more time to make sure that we have the correct answer. So we've got 127 plus 128 plus 129 plus 130 plus 131 plus 133 plus 134 plus 134 plus 135 plus 136 plus 137 plus 138 plus 139 plus 140 plus 141 plus 142 143 plus 144 plus 144. Apologies, I forgot to add 142, and we should have a total of 2728. So the sum of our data set is 2728, and we established that we have 20 values in our data set. Let's calculate that. So divided by 20 equals to 100. Okay, so our mean calculation, it was 2728 divided by 20, and it gives us an answer of 136,4 centimeters. Okay. Okay, guys, looking at the time, we are about to conclude our lesson. And there is another question which you have in this worksheet, which is the next one, question 2. You guys can answer that for yourself, and we'll do the corrections for you in the next session next week. Please do take care and study hard for your exams and tests that you are writing or to be written. Goodbye and take care.